Welcome to block 9 of our block of the month, and this is actually the last block that we'll be making for the quilt. And this one probably is my favorite one, so let's go ahead and get started. We've got some quarter square triangles and lots of cornered pieces to make. So let's get started with that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is some quarter square triangles, and we're going to make them larger and then trim down. So I have a piece of red and white, and I have a diagonal line drawn on the reverse or the back side of the red, and I'm going to stitch on each side of that line. Okay, and then the second piece that I have is going to be red and the blue. And again, I've drawn a line on the back of the red from corner to corner on the diagonal, and I'm going to stitch on each side of that line. Okay, and then I'm going to trim those apart. And then we're going to work on some of our other little subunits that we need to do. Okay, so then we are going to be able to press those. And then in the blue, the light blue, we're going to be adding a white square to one corner, and I have a diagonal line drawn, and I'm going to stitch on that line. And then also on the same unit, opposite corner, I'm going to stitch a navy. I've drawn the line corner to corner, and then we're going to stitch right on that line. So we've got 4 units to do that too. Okay, and so once those are stitched on, I'll just trim that 1/4 inch away from that seam, and then those will be ready to press. And then I'm also going to be working on the center square, and it has a white triangle added to each corner. So I have drawn my line on the back of 4 of the white squares, and then I'm just going to kind of make that like a square and a square unit, or I'm snowballing each of the corners, and I'm going to stitch on that line. And then I'm just going to kind of chain piece them through, and as I get them done, I'll just add them to my pile and then press all at one time. Okay, so I'll trim these away 1/4 inch from the seam allowance, and then we'll go press all of our subunits. Okay, I got my pile that I made with all of my units to be pressed. And so I'm just kind of setting the seam and then pressing that just back away. And this is the center section, and so I'm just pressing it to the white. But you can press it open if you want. You could press it to a certain side. And then these are going to be the corners of the block. And so again, same thing. I'm just setting the seam and I'm just pressing that snowballed corner back. And then one more, and then I'm going to put a clapper on those. And then we have the units that we've made for our quarter square triangle. And so on those, because of how I want them to nest, I'm going to press to the red on each of the units that I have here. And then when we line those up, then I know those seams are going to just sit right next to each other. So I'm going to line up a red and blue combination and a red and white combination. And so when I put those right sides together and I get that seam in there, I'm going to have a quarter square triangle block that looks like this. So there's one of those. And then here's going to be the second one. And I'm going to line those up. And I think I'm going to flip this one because I'm going to draw another diagonal line, but I want it to be where I can see it. So if I do it on the lighter fabric there, I think it'll be easier for me to see. Okay, so again, I'm just positioning that right in that, those corners, getting everything lined up, and then I'll draw a diagonal line, and I'm going to stitch on each side of that line on both of these. Okay, back at the sewing machine, I've just make sure I've got those nested together, and we're going to stitch. Okay, I'm going to cut those apart. And these are oversized, so we'll go ahead and press them and trim them down to make sure that they are the size we need for our block. Okay, and then I'm going to heat set that seam, and then I'm just going to roll it back and give it a press. That looks good. Okay, and then we're going to trim those units. And I'm using this Tucker trimmer that has all the different lines marked, but you can use any ruler, and just make sure when we're trimming them that our points of that corner on our square are matching up where that seam comes right into that point. And so we just have a little bit to trim off of each block. And I do like this method of cutting the quarter square triangles, doing it this way as opposed to cutting each individually, each little triangle individual, and then sew them together and hoping that it comes out the size that you want it to be. And what works best that I have found is whatever your finish size is going to be, you just need to cut your beginning squares 1 inch larger. And so that's what we've done throughout the pattern. And then you can use this method, and my units just seem to come out better when I make them this way. And if you have a way that works, then, you know, do whatever you get the best results with, because there's a bazillion different ways to do it. Okay, we got one more to trim. Okay, and then we are going to come back and we have one more trim to do on this unit. And we are needing to make sure that we're cutting off the side that has the white triangle. So position it where your red are at the top and the bottom. And then we're going to measure from the blue side, the size that we need it to be, and then we'll trim off this white section. Okay, so just make sure again that the blue is where we're measuring, and then we're cutting on the white. Okay, and that's our last one. And now we're going to go ahead and lay out the block so we can start assembling it. Get this stuff out of the way. Okay, so here is the board. And I know that, here's my units up here. I know that my center unit is this navy where I have a white corner now added to each corner of that unit. Oops. Okay, and then on our corner pieces up here, I know that the white is pointing towards the center and the navy corner is pointing to the outside. So I'll just orient those. And then I have a little white rectangle here that needs to go next to the white little triangle on the units that we just cut. So we'll need to make those 4 units before we can then go ahead and assemble our block. So that'll be the next thing that we'll have to do. So let's head to the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm going to grab those units that have the rectangular piece that we're going to add to the white triangle side of that quarter square unit that we just made. And then these, I know I can just press it to that white piece, and then I'll just put them back on the board so that they're in the spot where they need to be when we start assembling our block. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and just start assembling it like a 9-patch into rows, and then we'll join those rows. Okay, and then these seams here, I kind of finger press towards the outside, but I can feel that there's a lot going on right here. I've got several seams that are coming together, and it is rather thick. So I'm going to go ahead and press this seam open before I attach the top and bottom, but I'm going to get all those rows ready and then I'll press those. And the center one, I can just press that back to that solid rectangle that we added, and then that's going to lay nice and flat. Okay, that looks good. That'll be our center row. And then this last row here, okay, and so now you can kind of see I went ahead and pressed those two seams open, and then I think that's going to help it lie a little bit nicer. So since I've pressed them open, then I don't really have anything to a seam to nudge up to the other seam that I'm matching to. Nothing's going to nest, so I just have to be careful that I'm putting those, getting those lined up where they need to be, and you can definitely put a pin in there. Okay, and we'll just check that. Looks good, and now I'm going to add that other one on. This would be the top of it, and so I'm just lining up where that seam is going to meet. And then same on this side. Okay, and so there's our block center before we've pressed it. And those are pretty thick. I can tell it's going to be bulky, so I'm going to go ahead and press those two seams open as well. Okay, on the back of that, you can see that I pressed then those seams that where I just joined them, I pressed those open, and that does make it lay nice and flat. So whatever works best on your block. Sometimes I press the seams open. I do use a pretty short stitch length, so I'm not worried about them being pulled apart, once it's in the quilt and being quilted. Sometimes if it's a real loose stitch, it can kind of start to separate. So I know that that's going to be okay. I don't see my stitches anywhere on the top side, so I know I've got a nice tiny stitch length. Okay, so then I'm going to add on the side borders, and then we'll get this block finished. Okay, let's give it a press and then we'll do our applique. Okay, so I'm just going to set this seam here on this border and give it a finger press and then just press that nice and flat. And I'm also going to go over the top and bottom here, or the side ones, I guess. The shorter ones that I added first, I had just done a finger press on those, so I'll make sure that's pretty flat. Okay, that looks good. And now I use a dry iron, but sometimes it feels like my block isn't as flat as it could be, so what I'll do is go ahead and spray a little bit of water, or I've been also using this Magic Quilting and Crafting spray. I'll just spray a little bit on that, let it sit for just a second, and then go ahead and press it again. And then I'll get a really nice flat block. I have really starched a lot of my fabric before I started cutting or doing anything, so if it's gonna have shrunk at all or changed, it will do that when I've added the starch the first time. So this time it's just giving it a little extra moisture to kind of set those seams. I do use a dry iron, so just spraying a little bit on does seem to help. So it's basically using steam. It's just I don't like to put water in my iron because I feel like they just ruin that much faster if I've added water. So this system seems to be working out pretty good, so I'm just going to stick with it. Both of the blocks that we have done this month are the same. They each have, you know, a floating corner there, so it doesn't matter which one we pick to do our applique. And we're going to go ahead and place our interfacing with our circle marked on it. And I'm just going to get that oriented on there so that I've got the same distance away from that little corner edge. And then I will go ahead and measure these sides here just to make sure that I have it centered decently. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this, do my applique, and then I'll show you the finished blocks. Here are both of the block 9 blocks completed, and next month If you'll join me, we're going to go ahead and start setting them in our setting and adding some sashing rows. Thanks for watching.